Right. So, what we discussed in the previous session about the characteristics of microservices, all that. So, that's all
Okay.
we have discussed in the previous session.
Yeah.
Today, we are going to discuss about what are the 12-factor rules or nothing but apps which are required for us whenever we are working on microservices architecture, especially whenever there are some legacy applications we are using for a very long time, because legacy applications we are working, like what are the legacy applications? Most of the legacy applications were in the monolithic architecture part. But whenever we transformed into the cloud environment nowadays, because most of the applications we are moving towards uh, cloud environment. So whenever we are moving towards cloud environment, it's always important for us to understand about what are the different rules or the factors which are essentially required when we are moving towards the cloud side, because this is majorly
Okay.
uh, because on-premise application, or assume that, for example, legacy applications are completely into monolithic architecture, and whatever the cloud related services we are developing now, everything where belongs to microservices. That's what I can say, right? So when we are
Right.
working on this microservices, for every component we have different microservices we create. So when we are transforming these into the cloud environment to run microservices across different uh, providers, and as well as mm, uh, different cloud services, either it can be Azure or it can be AWS or it can be Google Cloud or IBM, all that. Different factors we need to understand, rules. The first one about single code base. This is the first one, followed by bundling dependencies, externalization configuration, backend services are addressable. At the same time, acceleration between build, release, and run. Right. So these are all the different factors we have. Right. So there are 12 factors which we need to understand. Now, whenever we try to
Okay.
understand the first one about single code base, this is what the first factor is, because whenever we are working on this single code base, in this single code base, majorly each and every microservices, whatever we are developing, either it can be a component level, whatever the components we are developing, in reference to the component level, whatever we are developing, each and every microservice has its own code base, because different microservices we have different codes. In reference to the component level I'm talking about, we have our own codes. Normally these codes we normally nowadays we are using like GitHub and all, everything, right? So different cloud service provide cloud service source code management, source control systems, and as the source code managements we are using to manage all the code, because most of the applications towards the cloud environment we are transforming. To manage these source code systems and all, we use different tools like GitHub, Subversion, etc. All that. Next one is called bundling dependencies, where whatever the microservices are we using will be bundled with all the required dependencies, whatever are required for and us to perform application performances and all, wherein by executing different libraries like HTTP, right? So all these things will be used in this bundling dependencies. Whereas the third rule, which is called as factor apps, right? So third factor rule is called externalizing
Uh,
configuration.
uh, Sorry to interrupt. I need to ask one thing. This bundling dependency, does it mean what the dependencies we are calling in POM? Is it that one? Or how
Yes.
we are bundling it to send it to the cloud, that bundling dependency?
No. It is towards the transformation to the cloud environment. On that context, it was.
Cloud and
Bundling
okay.
dependencies
How
are
we are bundling our codes to send to the cloud, right?
absolutely yes. Towards cloud environment, when we are transforming these dependencies like HTTPs and all everything are being used for that context. It was.
Okay.
Because whenever we want to execute, right? So final executable bundle we create, especially in the cloud environment. These bundling dependencies and all everything are majorly useful. Understood, Aishwarya?
Yes.
Aishwarya, listening?
Yes. Yes.
Yes or no? Right? Right. Now, the third one about externalizing configurations majorly, because whatever the configuration parameters we have, right? So whatever the configuration parameters we follow, so this configuration parameters and all everything will be advised in managing the external entity, wherein whatever the Microsoft microservices configurations we have, the parameters and all everything, all these will be loaded in the external servers, different external servers we have, because even though we are working on the cloud environment, whatever the configurations as well as the configuration parameters we follow, uh, whatever the microservices we create, right? So either it can be different component related microservices you can see there, right? So either it can be microservices 1 or 2 or 3. So all these microservices, especially these configuration parameters, all these things will be loaded in the external server, right? So this is the third factor rule which we need to understand whenever we are working on the microservices part in reference to the cloud transformations, all that. The fourth one about backing services are reimbursable, because whatever the backing services we are
I
implementing.
have one question in this third one. So what exactly we provide in the external configuration? Is it like which cloud I'm going to deploy? How many instances I need to deploy? Is it this thing or something else?
No. Actually, whenever we are working on the external configurations part, external configuration, 1 minute. Whenever we are working on the external configurations and all, these external configurations, when we are connecting from legacy systems to the cloud system, whenever we are connecting, this is where it is being used. For example, there was an existing on-premise application we are using, okay? A on-premise legacy application.
Okay.
Now we are transforming the data, right? So we are transforming the data and we are integrating, or we are transforming the data from the legacy applications to the new application. Let's say there is a data migration or cloud migration is happening. That time, whenever the cloud migration happen, in this cloud, whatever the applications, whatever the components we develop, for every component, we create different microservices. Okay. So whatever the parameters we follow, all these parameters we need to load in the external servers. External servers need not be from the outside. External servers which are connecting to the cloud environment, for that external servers, these configurations and all everything will be loaded. Understood? Clear?
Yes.
Understood or not? Right?
Yes. Yes.
Right? So this is the third point, because especially this is majorly because these 12 factor apps are the rules. Whatever are we talking about now, these 12 factor apps are the rules are majorly utilized, majorly useful for us when we are implementing a new applications, because nowadays whatever the applications we are working, everything is in microservices architecture only. But the major challenge when these 12 factor apps are the rules we follow is when we are migrating from cloud application, when we are moving from legacy applications to the cloud application, this is where generally these apps and rules we need to consider. Understood, Aishwarya, right?
Yes. Yes.
Because whenever we follow, for example, nowadays we are using an e-commerce website we are developing. Okay, now in present conditions, whenever we are working on e-commerce application we are developing in present situations, whatever the services we are going to develop for that e-commerce portal, for every service there is a microservices we are creating for all the components, right? Different components we are creating. So whenever we are creating these microservices, especially if we are developing, assume that it's developing a cloud application, these factors we have to consider. This is point number one. Point number two is, when assume that there was an existing application which was already in legacy application, which was already there, which was already existed. Now we are transforming from legacy application to the new application, for example, right? If this is what the situation nowadays we are doing. So at this time, what is that we have to do? We need to equally migrate the data as well, because data migration should also be taken into consideration. Understood, right? So we have to do the data migration. So whenever we are working on this data migration, it's always important for us to understand about these factor rules, 12 factor rules, because in the traditional legacy application, we don't follow any kind of rules because that is all completely a monolithic architecture. Everything was interconnected. But whereas when it comes to the cloud environment, whatever the data which was already there, whatever the data we are migrating from the legacy to the cloud applications and all, right from the scratch, we have to build microservices for all the components. So whenever we are, means nothing but indirectly, we are developing a new application. Indirectly, that was the case. Of course, data may be the old data, but end of the day, application, whatever we are designing is something new from the scratch. So even on these grounds also, this factor rules we have to consider. Understood, Aishwarya? Clear or not?
Uh, yes, sir.
Yeah, you go ahead. Please ask your question.
No, till now I am fine. Whenever
Right.
I'll ask you.
Right. So the next point about backing services and readdressables, as I told you, whatever the backing services normally uh, we work on this cloud environment must be accessible through like URLs, right? So usually we use different URLs, right? So whatever the URL through online cloud application where we are addressing accessibilities and all everything from URL. But whenever we are working on these backend services, we want to connect some external sources during the life cycle of the execution of the project, whatever we are working on, because whatever the external resources we are using, or like for example, when we are sending message to a messaging system, or sending an email, or persisting data to the databases and all that, all these services must be reachable through an URL only, right? So there is no external source of connectivity which will be used for the backing services. So whatever the backing services we are using, especially in this context, so these backing services are must be addressable. Either it can be a messaging system or sending emails and all, right? So all these things must be addressed as well as reachable through a specific URL of the application, whatever we are working. So this is also one of the factor rule which we have to consider. Understood, Aishwarya? Clear?
Yes.
Aishwarya, are you there?
Yeah, yes.
Did you understand this?
Yes.
Okay, because specific URL, through specific URL only, these services must be reachable. What are the services are we working? So it must be, because there is no backing services as separate, right? So what are the backing services we follow? everything, because microservices, whatever the messaging system to send or receive images, messages, and so all that. Normally, all these for that generally we use different APIs, right? We know like we create RESTful APIs, right? So or else JSON we may use, right? So or HTTP, right? So all these things are comes under the backing services part. This is one of the factor rule which we need to be followed with. Next one about isolation between build, release, and as well as run. Majorly, this is the principle we follow to create a strong isolation between building of an application, releasing, and as well as running the application stages, whatever we do while we are working on the application. Because normally builds are is to create executable whatever the jar files we have, including services runtimes like HTTP listener, all that. But whereas when it comes to the release level, when we see whatever the executables we are working on must be combined with release configurations such as production URLs. At the same time, it will also create a release versions which are similar and as less useful for working on like Docker, right? So all these things are being used in this regard. Understood? Clear?
1 second, I
Yes,
have a
very-
question here. Just give
please,
me a second.
please.
Please. So this build, does it mean the Jenkins tool which we use to build our
Integrate. Yes,
project?
yes, yes, yes. Because
Okay,
DevOps
so when we
environment,
run
when we are
our
integrating,
Jenkins pipeline, so that basically converts our code to executable jars, is it?
yes,
Okay. Okay, and whatever configuration we have given in our Jules YML, the file name we call, and
right.
whatever directions we have given, like where we need to deploy our in which environment, so it will deploy that executable jar into that particular environment, right?
Yes, yes, yes. That's what it was. Yes, Aishwarya, are you there?
Okay, okay, okay.
Right? Because normally we use different containers, similar like Docker and all, everything we use. Okay, because to manage this release versions, right? So probably, right? So because whereas whenever we are working on the run stage of the project, whatever the containers are we using, these are all must be deployed, right? So these are all will be deployed on the production environment. Right? So when it comes to integration part, Jenkins, because as in when we are working on the DevOps environment, this is being used because continuous integration and deployment and delivery will be taken place under DevOps environment. So this is where this is where generally this point majorly is being used for. Understood, Aishwarya?
Okay,
Yeah, right?
yeah.
This is being used. Next one about um, stateless shared nothing processes. Usually, majorly this is the rule I can say, which majorly uh, suggests microservices should be designed in such a way, whatever the stateless functions we have, or if there is any requirements to store, or else whatever the state of requirements we are managing through this backing the databases, right? So all these things are majorly implements when we are working on the microservices component, when we are building the microservices component. So the stateless shared services, processes, and all everything will be imparted in it. So this is also one of the factor rule which normally we use whenever we are working on this microservices in
So
cloud
what does this
transformation. Whenever.
stateless actually mean? Like I have seen like few applications are stateless, few are stateful. So is
Hmm.
it related to that one only?
Stateless and stateful, but this here we are taking stateless applications into consideration, not stateful.
Okay, so what is the difference, like basic difference when we ask stateless and stateful?
Stateless applications where whatever the statement are we developing when we are running the code or when we are deploying the application, whatever the transactions we are using. If you remember, whenever we use enterprise applications earlier in the olden days, if you see EJB, you might have heard about it, right?
Yes, yes.
Right? Did you remember that?
Yes,
EJB,
yes, I have,
right?
yeah,
Enterprise Java Beans applications we have, right? So earlier, whenever
yes.
there are some enterprise Java Bean applications, uh, enterprise Java Beans applications we are using on it. Whatever the protocols we used to design, right? So whatever the protocols we used to develop. Normally, the stateless protocols or the applications doesn't require any kind of servers to maintain, right? So because what are the servers to maintain or to retain the server information or the session details, all these things are not required for us to maintain, especially when we are working on the stateless applications.
Okay,
But whereas when it comes to the stateful applications and all, it requires servers to save the status of the session informations, right? So all these things are comes under stateful. So
okay,
whenever we majorly you see these sort of applications, whenever we works on enterprise Java Beans applications in the olden days, of course, we are not using now EJB. It's been very, very long time. So this is also one of the difference. So stateless is majorly stateless applications majorly focus that we don't require any servers to retain the information. But whereas when it comes to the stateful, it requires servers to save the status of the session information. All these things are being used in this regard. Understood?
okay,
Right. So these are
yeah,
the two differences wherein we need to understand in reference to the stateful as well as stateless as well as stateful applications are all about. Because the
okay,
fundamental differences majorly we need, because let's say for example if you take stateless system, because whenever we send a request to the server, at the same time the kind of response which we are getting back, right? So without storing any information. But whereas when it comes to the stateful, this is an information where whatever the response are we expecting or tracking the information or resending the request, right? So all these things will be received and it will be stored, right? So this information in reference to the application service information will be stored. But whereas in stateless, we don't see that. That's the key major differences you see from
okay,
stateless applications to the stateful
okay.
applications. Clear? Is it clear or not?
Yes, yes,
Right. So this is where generally we need to understand whenever we are working on this applications and all, especially whenever we start implementing the cloud related applications and all. When we talk about this cloud principles, so this is one of the area, right? Stateless shared nothing processes is also one of the key factor rule which normally we use whenever we are working on the applications. Is it clear to you, Aishwarya? Right.
yes, yes,
Right. So the next one about that one, next session, next points, this I'm going to discuss tomorrow. Okay.
yeah.
Because exposing services through port mining. So the mining 7 to 12, right? So these we are going to discuss in tomorrow's session.
Tomorrow session, okay.